tonight. As you know, Crestwood is seeking to expand their liquid propane storage in Seneca Lake area. They're meeting with a lot of resistance. However, we see the benefit of it for all landowners across the state, and we've been working with them. And tonight they're going to give us a little presentation to explain their side of the story, which doesn't seem to get talked up as much as it should in the media. So let me get our Skype presentation back on full size here, and we'll let you guys take over. Okay, gentlemen, we have you on the screen now, so you have the floor.
Great. Dan, thanks a lot for organizing this, first of all. With you tonight, you've got Bill Gotro, who's our president of Crude and NGL Liquids. He's responsible for the crude operation, the NGL operations, including the storage facility. My name is Brad Bacon. I'm one of our vice presidents who's been working on the project for several years now. I'm going to beg your indulgences. I've been down a couple of days, so I'm going to drink a lot of water on this call. So Bill, maybe you want to start off with giving a little bit of history on the project and the need for it, and maybe we can just go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Yeah, I'll be brief, but if anybody has any questions as we go through this, that's part of what we're here for. I think fundamentally, for a couple of decades now, the New York State and really New England have been kind of vulnerable to supply disruption in the peak winter demand. So propane is a seasonal, demand curve product, so it's about 3 times demand in the winter than it is in the summer. And historically, there's been 3 ways that you get propane supply. One is a big pipeline out of the Gulf Coast, which can only do about a third of it. The other is long-haul rail that's imported from Canada or other parts of the U.S. And then the third, historically, has been waterborne imports that come in at New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Virginia. And so, because all the supply is based on, very long-haul origins where it's got to travel significant distances, invariably there's an outage on the pipeline or a limit of what they can ship on the pipeline, cars that get delayed, imports that get delayed. And when that happens, you have a pretty significant disruption, and the local price of propane goes up dramatically. And so, there's been a fundamental shortage of local supply for product that is staged locally to deal with this peak demand period. And you talk to anybody in our industry that is on the retail side of the business, supplying consumers, and they'll echo those same stories. And if you look at probably 6 or 7 years of the past 10, there's been this type of disruption. Last year being a classic example of it. And so that's really been the basic premise of that facility. We originally, didn't envision anywhere near this kind of a challenge in terms of getting the product or project permitted, because, propane's been stored up in that market for decades. It actually used to be stored on our facility. It currently is stored across the street from our facility. And so we were really unprepared for the resistance that we got there, and really kind of the lack of understanding about what it is, why you need it, and how it works. And so, that's kind of the premise. I think the other thing that has happened really since we've been in the permitting process is that there is a lot of new natural gas liquids production, that is coming on from these major shale plays. And most, it's not in New York or New England, but it's in places like Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. And, the infrastructure strategy of the industry has been to figure out ways to get this new production really out of the market. So either, imported out of the market or sent back down to the Gulf Coast via pipeline. And so, it's a little counterintuitive, but really the situation has actually worsened a bit for New York and New England, even with the emergence of new supplies that are more proximate to that market, because everybody believes there'll be, more than the industry can handle, and so producers are focused on getting it out of the market. And so that's a big part of what we saw last year, because one of the pipeline that brings it up here reduced their capacity significantly because they took one of their lines out of service and reversed it permanently to go back to the Gulf Coast. So that's a little bit of the history of, the sort of lack of local supply in the market during the peak winter demand period, and why there's a need for this project, and really why we thought it would really not be a difficult thing to get permitted. But we've learned the hard way over about a 5-year period here on that one.
Yeah, and a couple things I'd echo here that Bill mentioned. Number one, that it's always important. I mean, you just don't have the rock there to have propane production in a quantity that, is going to meet consumer demand in peak winter periods. So that's going to be the case today. It's going to be the case whether anything comes with, energy policy decisions. So I think people don't realize that there's so much storage in New York already today. I think there's 30 plus natural gas facilities, 3 that have been around since, 2 of which were the early 1950s. One was, our salt plant 64. It's a consumer story more than anything else. And as Bill will tell you, we got an anchor customer to backstop this project long ago. We are basically a middleman that helps match up supply and demand. And that relationship terminated because we couldn't get it permitted in time. But the funny thing is, the need for the project today, even with all the increase in production as Bill was describing, is greater than when it existed, we thought it was going to go forward back in 2009. So I think, the awareness level of what's going on today gives storage operators a lot of credit. They don't draw attention to themselves. People don't know they're there. But you're talking about 60 plus years in people's backyards today and right at the lake. And, people just don't realize what they have and what serves their needs.
Yeah, I don't know, Brad, if we should talk a little bit about just the, the process. I mean, we have, diligently been through a very long process with the DEC to get the facility permitted, which include, over the years, which has included, some public hearings, a number of kind of redrafts and redesigns of our plan that we, voluntarily submitted to the DEC based on their feedback, the feedback of third parties from the engineering community, and also feedback from issues that were, potential issues that were raised by constituents in the public hearing.
Yeah, no, happy to. Kevin Bernstein just joined us, guys, and Kevin's been a local lawyer on this project from day one. I joined the company in 2010, so Kevin actually has a longer history with the whys and why nots. To Bill's point, when we filed this, I think people realized we'll just do it the standard way it was always done. You file your application, you don't have to go out of your way to get special quantitative risk analysis or local impact studies or anything that was, unusual, frankly. And when Gas-Free Seneca was formed in 2011 and you started to see more, I'll call it vocal opposition to the project, the energy philosophy at the time was, science and facts will prevail. Let's not get into a debate that will lead to misinformation, perhaps character attacks and other negative press. And so we tried to stay the course until there were 2 public hearings in the fall of 2011. And we realized that with all the, I'll call it the noise going on in Albany and in Schuyler County, that we had to do something to try to show that we were serious and committed. And so in January, we actually reconfigured the whole plan, split up the brine ponds, moved some of them away from the lake, reduced the capacity, definitely made it a more environmental friendly footprint based on a lot of what public comments received and frankly some from staff. So we then took the approach of spending about 6 months working very, very closely with staff to serve up something that met every single technological requirement or ask, frankly, that they could come up with. And so if you look back at the record, you'll find that in large part, we haven't been making filings since September 2012. We have been on track as a waiting game since then. And so, you go forward to midterm elections, and we are where we are now, which is we have an issues conference in February. But that probably provides a little bit of color of, Dan mentioned earlier, we don't have enough of our site out there. Trust me, we're working hard to get our site out there now. Hopefully you're starting to see some of that with, we have an updated website that was rolled out, less than 10 days ago, and op-eds and United Steelworkers, and there's a whole coalition that I think we have more than, last count I knew it was 3,000 letters that have been sent to the governor's office this year alone, because people realize with the TEPCO pipeline reversal that this past winter is probably not going to be an anomaly regardless of where propane prices go from here on out. It's going to be a matter of how fast in that barrel it get delivered to the customer, and it's not an overnight phenomenon when there's cold weather and excessive crop drying and everything else. Kevin, I don't know if you have anything to add or...
No, I think that the steps that we went through, particularly in 2012 on the brine ponds, once we reconfigured it to 2 brine ponds, it went above and beyond what ordinarily had been required for brine ponds before, either at our sister facility in Bath or other facilities in New York. In essence, what the DEC did, and to be very conservative, is to turn these brine ponds, which in essence just contain salt water, into facilities that meet the requirements for landfills, double line, leak detection, really all the bells and whistles, including groundwater monitoring, just to, again, be as conservative as possible. And frankly, at the time, we thought too conservative, but they're very conservatively designed to ensure that there really can be no impact to the environment. So, given the history that we had, or the Bath facility had, which the company now owns, with and a good success with single-line brine ponds, we at the time thought they were going well above and beyond, but we did so. We worked with the DEC over several months and provided several iterations of lengthy rolled drawings and plans that our engineers prepared just to demonstrate that it's safe and environmentally friendly, really will not result in any impacts. And so that's what we did most of 2012. And again, that was after we had lengthy hearings in 2011, as Brad mentioned. So we've gone through that down this road, and we've shown again with engineering drawings, engineering calculations, that this is going to be a safe facility.
Yeah, and I would emphasize, like Bill mentioned, we've stored propane on the site before there at US Salt. You had it in storage from 1964 to 1984 sadly. And then we've had natural gas in the same formations there at the US Salt site, all salt caverns since 1997. The geology has proven. You can go back and, I should tell you, Kevin obviously is our lawyer. I am a lawyer by training. Bill is a commercial lead. We rely on experts to tell us what we can and can't do fundamentally. Our own internal rockhound is a guy named John Isvan, who has spearheaded the national organizations, and he's got to be pushing 85 or 86 years old now, and he's more conservative. He's more conservative than anyone I've ever met. And here's a guy saying that he would not find better suited geology for what we're talking about. And he's backed up by Don Siegel at Syracuse and other experts. And so I know people want to make an issue about whether it's brine ponds or geology or a number of other issues. But at the end of the day, I mean, there isn't really one that's legit still.
Well, I think it's important to note that, you know, during that period of time, since 2012, you know, we actually have received a permit on a gas storage facility on that same property from FERC, you know, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because that is a regulated industry and a regulated asset, and so that process was actually more lengthy than normal, but it got done within a 12 to 18 month period, you know, and that just happened in the last 6 months, you know, about 12 to 18 months after we started that process. So that's a really good example of sort of the you know, the lack of definition and that you run into at the state level, whether it be the DEC, you know, or the state of New York, as it relates to, you know, rules and guidelines and behaviors around how they permit these projects. You know, when we do something on the regulated side of the business, you know, you pretty much know what the hurdles are that you have to clear. And as long as you do that effectively, you know, you generally get a consistent treatment and you get it within a certain timeline. And once a process starts, you know, they have certain timelines that they have to meet as a federal regulatory agency, you know, to keep it fair and keep it on a level playing field. It's just different at the state level.
It's also another example, Bill, of the kind of redundant regulatory oversight, particularly of the geology and the cavern integrity. I mean, first you had well, even before that, I mean, you had Gallery 1 for the Arlington facility, which was certificated by FERC back in the 90s. And then you had the process that we've been going through with Finger Lakes, where you had the state geologist issue a letter, I believe it was March 2013, where it's required that they conduct an independent review of all of the submissions that are made to DEC. Any submission that's made to DEC on the geology side for an underground storage permit must also go to the state geologist. And so that individual, who's a geologist by trade, had an independent review and concluded that the caverns have integrity and are safe by the carbon storage. And then you had the proceeding that Bill mentioned for Gallery 2, where you had FERC do, I think, much more than usual in-depth review of the geology. In this case, it was very detailed review, and they issued a certificate. And then more recently, you had DEC staff in connection with the Finger Lakes project then issue a draft permit as we are moving forward towards the issues conference, signifying that the facility is permittable, that we've done everything we need to do, and that the safety measures and standards, including with regard to the caverns and also the brine ponds, are recognized in that draft permit.
So Dan, you know, when you started off you had a great point about communication and outreach. I think the takeaway right now that we would say is we're trying to deal with what we control. We're trying to do a better job of getting our message out. We're trying to help people understand that, you know, this is about consumers. You know, this is about, you know, repurposing a manufacturing facility that's been there for 100+ years. It's got a number of angles in it, and we just happen to be a middleman trying to facilitate a market solution for a market need.
Gentlemen, one of the questions and one of the things I wanted to ask you tonight is some of the issues that we hear from the antis. And and there's a whole list of them, but let's try to go over some of them. One of the issues was, right off the bat, that this was going to be a CNG facility and store CNG. It was going to be a natural gas storage facility and store natural gas. This is strictly a propane facility, right?
Yeah, this is strictly LPG. We proposed 1.5 million barrels of propane and 600,000 barrels of butane. Storage components are basically the same for both. When you hear people mention LPG, they're talking about propane and butane. To put this in perspective, the caverns that are there today exist. They hold brine today. Brine is stored underground at the same pressure as LPG. Literally, you are swapping out one liquid for another liquid that's been in a hole for 30 plus years.
Okay, now, you've answered the question about the integrity of the cavern, because that's another thing that they come up with and say is that the cavern doesn't have any integrity. So it's good to hear that that's all been looked at. Another question that comes up with the antis all the time is the truck traffic. It's going to add so much truck traffic to the winery areas, into Watkins Glen, and the different towns. Can you have an answer on that?
Sure. I think when you go back and look at the record, and we actually did make this part of the record, it's available, again, multiple places it's on the website too. In 2011, we actually had a traffic commission study commissioned. We looked at the expected product flow by pipeline, rail, and truck. And then looked at the traffic that was already going on at 14 at the time, entering 14A, which is now permanent. And it basically concluded that over the peak winter period, remember that tourism's a summer event, you basically had, what was the stat, Kevin? One additional truck every hour, potentially, if it was maxed out.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more, but it was pretty minimal. It may have been 4 per hour during an 8-hour day. And what we did is we submitted that traffic study to the DOT, and they found it satisfactory. And then we submitted a supplemental traffic study to the DOT, which is pretty much moved now, because at the time, if you're familiar with the area, they were rehabilitating the ramp that goes from 14 north to 14A toward Penn Yan. And so there was a concern at the time that if the trucks couldn't use the ramp, they would have to make a left turn. They would have to go past the ramp and make a left turn. And we actually did a supplemental study showing that that wouldn't have an impact. And we submitted that to DOT, and they agreed. Of course, since that time, that ramp has all been rehabilitated and reopened. So that's why I say that part of the supplemental study was moot. But so yeah, we looked at that issue, and we even met with the mayor of Watkins Glen, and that was the primary issue. Of course, there was the year before that we had even commissioned that study, there was much more significant truck traffic existing and going through the village of Watkins Glen. So we weren't going to add measurably to that, and I think that since then, Brad, you can kind of bring us up to date.
So what's happened here since we had the issues conference, we kind of know what we expect a lot of the issues to be. Obviously, Earth Justice is coming on board for Gas for Seneca in 2013 has made an issue of, I'll call it extended traffic risk, right? Whether you're talking about movements by rail or truck. And when we said, okay, we haven't looked at the market, since 2012 and been on the record, we'll update it. And basically our current outlook is that there is no truck traffic. The need right now, in that area with bath facility in place, Schuyler County, their enterprise, and also in Cortland, it's storage heavy, right? There's no immediate need for truck takeaway there today. And so since the TEPCO pipeline reversal, we're really in Bill's bailiwick here, the greatest need is the storage short eastern side of the state. And so we're currently forecasting that 100% of the propane comes in and goes out by pipeline. And, the vast majority of the butane is rail, and that there's no truck traffic for either component. And so right now we're in the process, we've actually put that information on our website, but we're in the process of getting an extended quantitative risk analysis from Quest, which is national risk assessment company that does this in the energy sector all the time and was suggested by Gas for Seneca. They're going to do an extended QRA to measure this risk. And so they're still be out there, but there's not gonna be really any truck traffic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that is, you know, what happens is you've got a pipeline that only has a finite capacity. And it's got drop-off points on its way up to the northeast in Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And it has its own cavern across the street from us at Watkins Glen. But the capacity on that pipeline to deliver product either at Watkins Glen or at their terminus location, which is Selkirk, New York, inevitably in the winter, the capacity of both of those terminals is much greater than the product that they can actually move to those terminals. And so what has evolved from the time that we started trying to get this permitted is both a commercial arrangement that we struck with Enterprise because they know that their system could benefit from this storage project. That essentially allows us to, you know, move product up there in the winter, in the summer on their pipeline system when it's not fully utilized. And then in the winter, we re-inject it back into the pipeline so that they can fully utilize their capacity to deliver at Selkirk, New York. And so that is kind of different than the outlook on how we thought it would be used when we first started to permit it. I mean, we always thought that we would move some in there by pipe, and we expected to move some back out of there by pipe. But that strategy has really solidified, you know, over the last few years, to the point now where you got all this new production in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and it now has access to be physically put into the Enterprise pipeline system in the summer when there's no demand for it. You know, move up to our facility at Watkins Glen and then be put back into their pipeline in the winter to move on to Selkirk, New York, where, you know, where they have their greatest point of undersupply, you know, in the wintertime.
I think I'd emphasize one point here too, because Bill touched on it, and this group that we're talking to is going to be aware of this better than most. When you have a period of 5 years, that is an extremely long period in the market, whether you're talking about natural gas or propane or anything else. If you look at what the conditions were in 08, 09, even 10, 11, they're just starkly different than what you see today. And so this process has been kind of, one of these grassroots tactics has always been, well, you said X. Well, you're right, we did say X, but we said it, 5 years ago. And so when we update our views and they come up with something that's better, then we're kind of in this do loop if they don't like that either. So just remember that, like I said, this group's fully aware of how much can change or not change in 5 years. But this market in particular has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, and as an example of that, just during that period of time, the United States has gone from a net importer, of LPGs to one of the largest exporters in the world. And so that's a classic example of what we're talking about happened last year, where because we now are a net exporter, we're shipping cargoes out of the Gulf Coast at what is basically a Gulf Coast even set of economics. And because we didn't have it in New York and New England, we had to go out on the international market, compete as an industry to cause an import to come here that wasn't economic, and we had to pay Gulf Coast plus $1.50 to get it to come to New England. And so that's kind of a graphic example of sort of the disequilibrium that exists in this local market, New York, New England. And who pays for that? I mean, it's all going right to the consumer. We calculated that, like in New York State alone, consumer costs were about $410 per household and higher. than they would have been if this facility were there, because instead of paying, $1.50 for the industry to bring imported product in, would already been sitting there. And, the storage economics are more like 20 or 30 cents with transportation.
Bill, that's a great point that you just brought up about the economics for the individual homeowner. And I hope that you can really trumpet that message. That would really get a lot of people's attention in the areas where this is not in their backyard, like Binghamton, Syracuse, and so forth. That'll get their attention. I'd like to back up for one moment, a question. You talked about the quantitative risk analysis that you're having Quest do. I believe prior to this, you had been working off of an internal risk analysis, is that correct?
No.
No, you've always had outside risk analysis?
So if you go back to, the hearings in 2011 in the fall, I think what you saw come out of it was, it's basically spearheaded by Gasper Seneca saying, well, what are the risks of the facility?
Right.
And we already knew what the risk of the geology, the risk of the surface facilities really was. But we went ahead and we hired a national risk consulting named Quest. And this is what they do every day. They go through quantitative risk assessment within energy projects. And so we had that QRA completed. We made it public. We filed it with the DEC. I'm going to mess up the date, but it was early 2012. In fact, I think it was January 2012. So we had the QRA that looked at, quantified the risk of this facility relative to other storage facilities. So that was what we had done from a historic perspective. And by the way, that was beyond what was ever done before for the storage facilities and the underground storage permits in New York. So over time, what you've seen for the last, like I said, it's been since March 2013, the clamor has been, well, DEC, you haven't looked enough at the risk associated with increased rail traffic using LPG, which would result from this facility, and increased truck traffic. So we don't think there's truck traffic period now, but we'll go get another QRA. So Quest is in the process right now of pulling together an expanded quantitative risk assessment that looks at the transportation risk associated with this project. And it'll have the 2014 assumptions around how a product comes in and out of the facility, and it will go back to the 2012 to show, well, what if you still assume truck traffic? So that's being done today, and we'll be able to make it public shortly.
That's very proactive on your part, because just today I read an article that mentioned that was exactly what the antis were going to be focusing on, was the lack of analysis regarding some of the points that you just said you are now looking into and addressing. And quite honestly, when I read that article, my thought was, well, that's out of the scope of what they would even ever have to do. So you get a lot of credit for going out, what I consider to be outside of the scope.
Well, and remember, Dan, that, the part of the problem here is transparency. If you want to cut through the noise, you have a process that the DEC has the same records that the company has and has for decades. And you can look at the, objective-minded policymakers and technicians can look at the same set of data and facts and go, okay, we can reach a fundamental common ground on what should and shouldn't happen. So the DECs have the well logs, the sonars, the MIT test results. I mean, they've had a whole track record of the geology associated with these galleries for several years. In fact, people talk about cavern failures. People want to ignore the fact that the DEC authorized salt to put that cavern back in service because all the records showed that it had so much salt on the dome and never experienced a collapse that they were happy to have it mining salt. So you have to understand that there's going to be a reach when there's not an ability to get access to the information, and then you're left speculating.
And I think the FERC permit of another one of the galleries on that same property, you know, it really just should just take the geology off the table, because you have a federal energy regulatory commission that this is all they do all over the country, you know, permit, you know, a gallery on the same property just next to the ones that we're trying to get permitted.
Okay, gentlemen, at this point, I think what we'd like to do is start passing the microphone around here on the floor, open it up to questions from the floor. Is that okay with you, gentlemen?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, questions out here, anybody? Okay, I'm gonna go over here to, this gentleman is Mr. Dick Downey.
I see just a fundamental problem. You're rational, logical, and moral, and the others are crazy ideologues. And you have justice against you. They have a 16 by 16 backlit ad in the mezzanine of Newark Airport. I mean, what are you going to do about that? They are being funded by somebody. What are you going to do about it? They are not grassroots. You're not dealing with grassroots people. What are you going to do?
I'm getting this, I admit I had a hard time hearing the question, guys, so bear with us, but I think I have the connotation there from the end. You know, it is a grassroots tactic, though, and playbook that you're seeing. And by the way, we have this with the natural gas pipeline in the Northeast that out of the FERC, Earth Justice, who was representing different environmentalists, they ran to the Second Circuit and got it shut down for, I want to say 21 days. We had to go argue it just to prove that, you know, the FERC's decision was sound and everything. So you're seeing them come in the process late. You're seeing them then introduce issues that they had full opportunity to comment on and be part of when the public, you know, when the record was open. And then you see a different side of it as you're getting to, which is the funding and friendships and connections, things of that nature that all play into it. You know, Bill's the president of one of our business units. I venture to say that we're probably not going to start getting into public debates on, you know, the funds that are actually funding a lot of this opposition, and we darn well know that there's busloads of people coming up from New York City for a lot of events here.
And I think I couldn't hear the comment, but I got the gist of it, and it's a very good comment. There actually was a recent Senate committee report on the funding of the so-called environmental movement. I don't, maybe you are or not referring to that report. It came out, I think, earlier in the summer, like at the end of July. But that's what you may be referring to, but we're doing the best we can responding with facts instead of what the typical tactics are of these so-called grassroots efforts.
And look, there's one other thing that you have to keep in mind that we are a public company, but for a project, this is not a large project if you look at storage facilities nationwide. And I tell you, we probably spent more on this one, Bill will tell you, we spent more on this one than probably any other storage facility deserves. But you can't just go toe for toe with unlimited funding when it comes to grassroots tactics, unfortunately. So, you know, like I said, we're doing what we control, which is try to help people understand the facts. Welcome them in, go take a look at the facilities, talk about the science, and hopefully, you know, objective minds will prevail on this. And you know, so we are trying to do a better job of outreach, but we're probably not going to start calling out the source of a lot of the funding, unfortunately. Does that, and I apologize, guys, I didn't catch all the questions, so hopefully that responded to part of it.
Actually, you've done a very good job of answering the question, don't you think, Dick?
Yes.
Yes. And you're right, the report that you're referring to from the U.S. Senate Subcommittee, that is a report that Dick was referring to, as well as some other sources of knowledge. But again, it sums up exactly what he was referring to, and you did a great job of answering the question.
Yeah, it's very eye-opening, that report, actually.
Scary. We have another gentleman here with a question.
Yeah, you said this facility has been in operation for many years, and you have other storage facilities. My question is, has there been any major leaks or contamination as, with respect to this particular facility or your other storage facilities? I mean, what's the track record look like?
So, great question. Industry has a tremendously successful track record, particularly when you're talking about storage. You could look at other operations, mining, for example, where there's been more incidents that have impacts on the environment than storage projects, whether you're talking about natural gas or LPG. Bath facility's been in place since the early 1950s. Hartford Mills there, early 1950s. Watkins Glen for Enterprise, 1984, after they stopped leasing cavern space from U.S. Salt for 20 years. They actually wanted to buy it, and Salt wasn't interested, so they just built their own. There's been no major events. We were talking about spills or releases or other things that we've been able to see that anyone can point to. In fact, I'll come back to the fact that most people don't even know they're there, which is a huge compliment to storage operators and keeping a low profile and doing the right thing and doing their job.